Throughout history, some discoveries were never meant to see the light of day. From ancient tombs guarded by silent hexes to relics emitting a literal, deadly energy, there is a thin line between a priceless find and a fatal mistake. Today, we are diving into a double feature of the world's most chilling mysteries. We've combined the 24 most cursed artifacts and forbidden relics that have left even the world's bravest archaeologists and scientists paralyzed with fear. Brace yourselves, some secrets are better left buried. We're taught that archaeologists are seekers of truth, brave explorers uncovering the secrets of history. But what if some secrets were never meant to be found? In the quiet halls of the world's most famous museums, there are objects kept under heavy lock and key. Not because they are fragile, but because they are heavy. Heavy with a history of sudden tragedy, unexplained illness, and a darkness that science simply cannot explain. From the screaming mummies of Egypt to the blood-stained altars of the Aztecs, today we're stepping into the shadows. These are the 12 cursed artifacts that even the experts refuse to touch. November 4th, 1922. A date etched in the annals of history, not just for the gold discovered, but for the shadow it cast. Howard Carter, a British archaeologist who had spent years scouring the Valley of the Kings, finally hit stone. A step, then another, then a sealed doorway. When he finally peered through a tiny hole and Lord Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, Carter famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." But those wonderful things came with a warning. Legend has it that near the door, they found a clay tablet that read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Curiously, that tablet later disappeared from the official records. Coincidence? Or the first sign of a cover-up? The tragedy began just 5 months later. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the entire dig, died in Cairo. The cause? A mosquito bite on his cheek that became infected after he accidentally cut it while shaving. It sounds mundane, almost too simple. But here's where it gets eerie. At the exact moment he passed away, all the lights in Cairo reportedly went out. Back in England, miles away, his beloved dog Susie let out a howl and dropped dead. When the media got hold of this, the curse of the pharaohs was born. But for the scientists, the mystery was just beginning. You see, when they finally performed an autopsy on King Tut's mummy, they found a healed lesion on the king's left cheek, in the exact same spot where the mosquito had bitten Carnarvon. The body count didn't stop there. George J. Gould, a wealthy financier who visited the tomb, died of a fever shortly after. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, died just days after handling the body. By 1935, the press claimed at least 21 people connected to the excavation had met untimely, often bizarre ends. Now, let's look at the insights. If you're an archaeologist today, do you actually fear a ghost? Not exactly. You fear the invisible dwellers. For over 3,000 years, that tomb was a sealed biological time capsule. When Carter cracked that seal, he didn't just let in light, he woke up ancient spores, specifically Aspergillus flavus. This is a deadly fungus that can survive for millennia in the lungs of mummies or on the walls of damp tombs. For someone with a weakened immune system, like Lord Carnarvon, breathing in these spores would cause a catastrophic respiratory failure. Symptoms that look a lot like a curse to someone in 1923. But there's a psychological layer too. The nocebo effect. If you believe you are cursed, your body can literally manifest physical illness. The stress, the fear, and the intense pressure of the media might have physically weakened these men. Yet, even with modern respirators and hazmat suits, many archaeologists still feel an overwhelming sense of dread inside the chamber. They refuse to touch the remaining sealed jars or move the final treasures. Why? Because science can explain the fungus, but it can't explain why Carter's pet canary was eaten by a cobra, the symbol of the pharaohs, on the very day the tomb opened. Some things are better left undisturbed. Tutankhamun wanted to be forgotten in the darkness. We dragged him into the light, and since then, the world has never quite looked at ancient Egypt the same way again. If Tutankhamun's curse is about a quiet, lingering shadow, then the story of Pharaoh Seqenenre is a violent, visceral scream that has been frozen in time for 3,500 years. Most mummies are prepared with divine care, limbs straightened, faces relaxed into a mask of eternal peace. But not him. When archaeologists first unwrapped Seqenenre, they didn't find a king at rest. They found a man captured in his final, agonizing moment of terror. Look at his face. His mouth is pulled back in a jagged grimace, his eyes are bulging, and his head tells a story of absolute brutality. This is why many archaeologists and curators find him deeply unsettling to handle. It doesn't feel like studying history, it feels like witnessing a murder that happened just minutes ago. For decades, the Screaming King was a mystery. Why was he buried in such a state? Was it a palace coup? A botched mummification? It wasn't until 2021, when Dr. Sahar Salim and the legendary Zahi Hawass performed a high-resolution CT scan, that the horrifying truth was revealed. Seqenenre wasn't just killed, he was executed. The scans showed 5 distinct wounds to his head, each made by a different weapon. There's a massive gash in his forehead from a heavy axe, a blunt force trauma above his eye from a mace, a dagger wound behind his ear. The evidence suggests he was surrounded. He was likely on his knees, his hands tied behind his back, which explains why there are no defensive wounds on his arms. He couldn't fight back. He could only endure. But here is where the curse, or the refusal to touch, comes in. Unlike other mummies, Seqenenre was mummified in a hurry. He was likely left to rot on the battlefield or in a prison cell for days before his loyalists could retrieve his body. The smell of decay was so deeply embedded into his remains that even thousands of years later, when he was first unwrapped in the 1880s, the stench of rotting flesh was said to have filled the room, making the excavators physically ill. Archaeologists today treat him with a specific kind of distance. There is a heavy psychological weight to his presence. To touch his skin is to touch the marks of a battle that changed Egypt forever. He was the king who stood up against the Hyksos invaders, the foreign rulers who had humiliated his people. His death was the spark that led his sons to eventually drive the invaders out and begin the new kingdom. Yet despite his hero status, there's an aura of unfinished business around him. The CT scans revealed that the embalmers tried to hide his horrific wounds with layers of resin, almost like a 16th century BC version of plastic surgery. They wanted to give him dignity, but the trauma was too deep to conceal. Many workers at the Cairo Museum have reported an overwhelming sense of grief when standing near his display. It's a primal reaction. Our brains are hardwired to react to a face in pain, and Seqenenre's face is the ultimate expression of human suffering. Some researchers refuse to perform further invasive tests on him, arguing that he has already endured enough. To probe him further feels less like science and more like a second execution. When we talk about cursed artifacts, we often think of magic spells. But Seqenenre reminds us that the most powerful curse is often the memory of a violent end. He remains a screaming testament to a war that refused to stay buried. He isn't just a king, he is a warning of what happens when the past is forced to face its own brutal reflection. Deep beneath the sands of Saqqara lies a pyramid that from the outside looks like little more than a pile of rubble. It is the Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty. But don't let the exterior fool you. When you descend into its narrow, suffocating corridors, you aren't just entering a tomb. You are entering a living book of spells. For 3,000 years, these walls were sealed in total darkness. When Gaston Maspero first opened the chamber in 1881, he was stunned. Every inch of the limestone walls was covered in exquisite blue-green hieroglyphs. These are the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in human history. But these aren't prayers of peace. They are magic scrolls carved in stone, designed to ensure the king's survival in the afterlife by any means necessary. And I mean any means. What makes archaeologists hesitate here isn't a physical trap, but the chilling intensity of the words themselves. Among the spells for protection in flight, there is a section known to scholars as the Cannibal Hymn. In this text, Unas is described as a god who lives on his fathers and feeds on his mothers. It says, "Unas is the bull of heaven, who lives on the beings of every god, who eats their entrails. Imagine standing in a cramped, airless room, surrounded by thousands of carvings that describe a king hunting, cooking, and eating the gods to steal their power. The atmosphere inside the Unas chamber is notoriously heavy. Many epigraphers, the experts who spend hours tracing and translating these symbols, report a profound sense of nausea, sudden drops in temperature, and an overwhelming feeling of bad air. Now, skeptics will tell you it's just poor ventilation or the smell of ancient bat guano. But even the most hardened scientists admit there's something strange about the acoustics of the room. The texts were meant to be chanted. They are phonetic codes designed to vibrate at specific frequencies. When researchers speak these words aloud to study the phonetics, they often describe a vibrating energy that feels like the walls are pushing back. There is a specific reason why many areas of these texts are restricted. It's not just about preservation of the stone, it's about the psychological toll. The Egyptians believed that words had heka, magic power. They believed that by carving these spells, the spells became eternally active. To an archaeologist, you aren't just reading a dead language, you are standing in the middle of a continuous ritual that has been running for 4,000 years. One of the most unsettling details is how the hieroglyphs are carved. In later tombs, signs of dangerous animals like lions or snakes were often carved in half or maimed so they couldn't come to life and harm the deceased. But in Unas's chamber, the magic is raw and full strength. The predators are whole. The spells are aggressive. Archaeologists who spend too much time in the subchambers often suffer from vivid, disturbing dreams. It's as if the mind, after staring at these rhythmic blue symbols for hours, begins to download the ancient fears of the old kingdom. There's a silent agreement among many site guards. You don't stay in the Unas chamber after the sun goes down. We often think of scrolls as paper that can be burned, but Unas turned his entire tomb into a permanent, indestructible scroll. It is a place where the barrier between the living and the dead is stretched thin. Scientists come for the history, but they stay for as short a time as possible, because in the Pyramid of Unas, the walls don't just have ears, they have a hunger that science can't quite explain. In the pantheon of ancient Egypt, there is no deity more terrifying than Sekhmet. She is the powerful one, the lion-headed goddess of war, destruction, and pestilence. But she is also a goddess of healing, if and only if you can survive her rage. Throughout Egypt, thousands of statues were carved of her in hard black diorite or granite. But there's one specific collection of black quartz statues that archaeologists and museum curators treat with a level of superstitious caution that borders on the religious. Why? Because Sekhmet wasn't just a symbol. To the ancients, these statues were living vessels. During the reign of Amenhotep III, over 700 of these statues were commissioned. The goal was to appease her, to stop her from destroying humanity with plagues. This means that for over 3,000 years, these black stones were the focal point of intense, blood-soaked rituals. When you stand in front of a black quartz Sekhmet, the first thing you notice is the eyes. They don't look past you, they look through you. Many archaeologists who have worked in the Mut Temple at Karnak, where hundreds of these statues were unearthed, refuse to stay in the ruins after twilight. They describe an oppressive energy, a feeling as if the air itself has become thick and metallic, like the smell of fresh blood. There are documented accounts from museum staff in London, Paris, and Cairo who claim that the statues breathe. They report a low-frequency hum vibrating from the stone, a vibration that science struggles to explain. Geologists might point to the crystalline structure of the quartz, which can exhibit piezoelectric properties under pressure or temperature changes. But that doesn't explain the Sekhmet syndrome, a phenomenon where handlers experience sudden, irrational outbursts of anger or intense, unexplained fevers after moving the statues. In the 1970s, a group of workers moving a Sekhmet statue reported that the stone felt warm to the touch, despite being in a climate-controlled room. Moments later, the heavy lifting equipment snapped, something that shouldn't have happened under that weight. It's as if the goddess refuses to be moved without the proper ancient protocols. Archaeologists today often follow an unspoken rule. Never look a Sekhmet statue directly in the eye for too long. In ancient times, priests had to perform a ritual of appeasement twice a day, 365 days a year, just to keep her calm. They would offer her beer dyed red with pomegranate juice to trick her into thinking it was blood, hoping to put her into a drunken sleep. When we dig these statues up today, we are effectively waking up a goddess of war who hasn't been fed her ritual offerings in 3 millennia. There's a famous story of a researcher who mocked the idea of the curse while working in a storage basement with a Sekhmet figure. That night, he suffered a catastrophic burst appendix. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in the world of Egyptian archaeology, coincidences involving Sekhmet tend to be unusually violent. This is why many of these statues remain in situ, left exactly where they were found in the dirt. Even the ones in world-class museums are often placed in corners or behind barriers where they won't be constantly disturbed by the flow of crowds. Curators have noted that even the most chaotic groups of schoolchildren tend to go silent when they enter a room guarded by Sekhmet. It's a primal, predatory presence. She is the goddess of the 7 arrows, the bringer of plagues. And in an era where we think we have conquered the world with science, the black stone of Sekhmet stands as a silent reminder. Some powers don't belong to the past. They are simply waiting for someone to touch the stone and wake them up. If you ever find yourself alone in a museum gallery with a lion-headed woman carved from black rock, do yourself a favor. Don't linger. She's been waiting a long time to finish her hunt. In 1925, 3 years after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, Howard Carter found something nestled against the right thigh of the boy king's mummy. It was a dagger. At first glance, it was beautiful. A gold hilt decorated with crystal and a sheath embossed with lilies and jackal heads. But when Carter pulled the blade from its scabbard, he stopped cold. The blade wasn't gold, it wasn't bronze, it was iron. Now, you might think, what's so scary about an iron knife? Here's the problem. In 1323 BC, Egypt was still deep in the Bronze Age. Iron smelting wouldn't be mastered for another several centuries. To the Egyptians of that time, iron was more precious than gold because it didn't come from the earth. They called it Bi-Am-Ta, or iron from the sky. This dagger is a literal piece of a fallen star. And for many archaeologists, handling a weapon forged from a cosmic traveler brings a sense of otherworldly dread that no earthly artifact can match. For decades, scientists debated its origin. Was it a gift from a foreign Hittite king? Or was it something more mysterious? In 2016, using X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, researchers finally confirmed the truth. The high levels of nickel and cobalt in the blade matched the composition of the Karga meteorite, which fell hundreds of miles away from the Nile. But science only explains the material. It doesn't explain the weight of the object. There is a persistent legend among the workers who first handled the dagger that it possesses a cold that never leaves the metal. No matter how hot the Egyptian sun gets, the blade remains unnervingly chilled to the touch. Archaeologists today treat this dagger with extreme caution, not just because it's fragile, but because it represents a bridge between our world and the void of space. There is a psychological taboo about moving it. In ancient Egyptian belief, objects from the sky were considered the literal bones of the gods. To hold this knife is to hold a fragment of a deity's body that fell in fire and brimstone. There is a disturbing story, unconfirmed by official museum records, but whispered in the halls of the Cairo Museum, of a technician who was tasked with cleaning the blade's display case in the late 90s. He reported hearing a low, metallic ringing sound, like a bell being struck miles away whenever he got too close. He suffered a sudden, severe vertigo and collapsed. He later claimed it felt as if the room's gravity had shifted, as if the dagger was trying to pull him toward it. Think about the ritual significance. This wasn't a weapon for war. It was a weapon for the afterlife. It was placed on the king's thigh to protect him as he traveled through the stars to the field of reeds. It was meant to cut through the spirits of the underworld. When we study it, we aren't just looking at a tool, We are looking at a cosmic key. Today, the dagger is kept in a highly controlled environment. Many researchers refuse to perform further invasive testing, like carbon dating or deep tissue sampling of the hilt. They say it's to preserve the artifact. But if you talk to them off the record, they'll tell you something else. The blade feels awake. There's a primal fear of weapons that don't belong to our world. We see it in our modern myths of alien technology, but for King Tut, it was a reality. He went into the grave armed with a star. And as we look at that unrusted, perfectly preserved iron today, we have to ask, if it came from the heavens to guard a king, what happens to the mortals who dare to take it away? Some artifacts are protected by spells. This one is protected by the cold, infinite silence of the cosmos. And that is a curse that no science can ever break. They call it the most beautiful object in the world. A 45-carat deep blue diamond that seems to hold the mysteries of the ocean within its facets. But behind the reinforced glass of the Smithsonian Institution lies a trail of blood, bankruptcy, and madness that spans 4 centuries and 3 continents. This is the Hope Diamond, but for those who know its true history, it is anything but hopeful. The story begins in the 17th century in India, at the Kolar mine. Legend says the stone wasn't found in a cave. It was plucked from the eye of a statue of the goddess Sita. This was the first act of desecration. The goddess, robbed of her sight, supposedly cursed anyone who would dare to own her eye. And the curse didn't wait long to strike. Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, the French gem merchant who brought the stone to Europe, was said to have been torn apart by wild dogs in Russia shortly after selling it. But that was just the beginning. The diamond found its way into the French royal court, becoming the French blue. Its most famous owners, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. We all know how their story ended, under the cold blade of the guillotine during the French Revolution. After the chaos in France, the diamond vanished, only to reappear in London years later, now cut smaller to hide its identity. It was purchased by Henry Philip Hope, from whom it gets its modern name. But the Hope family soon fell into financial ruin. The stone was sold, and then the real horror began. Every owner seemed to meet a tragic fate. Prince Ivan Kanatovsky was killed by revolutionaries. A Greek merchant drove his car over a cliff. But the most chilling chapter belongs to Evelyn Walsh McLean, a wealthy American socialite who bought the diamond in 1911. She wore it to parties, even putting it on her dog's collar, mocking the curse. The results were devastating. Her eldest son was killed in a car accident. Her daughter died of a drug overdose. Her husband ran off with another woman and died in a mental institution. Eventually, the family fortune evaporated. Evelyn died alone, still clutching the blue stone that had systematically destroyed everything she loved. So, why do archaeologists and gemologists today treat it with such hands-off reverence? Is it just a superstition? In 1958, the diamond was donated to the Smithsonian. The man who delivered it, James Todd, had his leg crushed in a truck accident shortly after. Then his wife died of a heart attack. Then his house burned down. It was as if the diamond was giving one last parting gift of misery before being locked away. But here is the scientific insight that makes it truly eerie. Most blue diamonds get their color from boron, but the Hope diamond has a unique, terrifying property. When you expose it to shortwave ultraviolet light, the diamond doesn't just glow. It glows blood red. Long after the UV light is turned off, the stone continues to phosphoresce, shining like a glowing ember for several minutes. To the naked eye, it's a brilliant blue. But in the dark, under the right conditions, it looks like a heart of fire. Scientists call it a chemical reaction. But for the researchers who study it, standing in a dark lab with a diamond that is bleeding, red light, it feels like the stone is alive. It feels like the eye of the goddess is finally seeing the darkness it has caused. Today, the Smithsonian refuses to let anyone wear it. It stays behind a rotating glass plinth, protected by layers of steel and sensors. There is no plan to ever recut it or remove it from its setting. It has become a forbidden object, not because it's fragile, but because we've finally learned our lesson. Some beauties are meant to be admired from a distance. Because if you look too closely into the deep blue of the Hope Diamond, you might just find that the curse is looking back at you. In 1924, deep in the jungles of British Honduras, now Belize, a young girl named Anna Mitchell Hedges was celebrating her 17th birthday in the most extraordinary way. She was exploring the ruins of a lost Maya city called Lubantun with her father, the explorer Frederick Mitchell Hedges. As she peered through a crack in a collapsed altar, she saw something glittering in the dust. It was a skull, but it wasn't made of bone. It was carved from a single, massive block of clear quartz crystal. They called it the Skull of Doom. And for the next 80 years, this object would become a focal point for supernatural claims, scientific investigation, and a deep-seated fear that some things are better left buried in the jungle. The skull is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. It's anatomically perfect, featuring a detachable jaw that moves on polished sockets. But here's where the mystery begins. The Maya, or any ancient civilization for that matter, supposedly lacked the tools to carve such a hard material against the natural grain of the crystal. If it were carved by hand with sand and water, experts estimate it would have taken 300 years of continuous daily scrubbing to achieve this level of smoothness. Frederick Mitchell Hedges himself was terrified of it. He wrote in his memoirs that the skull was the embodiment of all evil, and that several people who have scoffed at it have died, and others have been struck by strange illnesses. He refused to speak about its origin in detail, claiming it was used by Maya high priests to will death upon their enemies. They believed that if the priest looked into the skull and visualized a person, that person would simply stop breathing. As the skull traveled the world, the stories grew. People who sat in a room with the skull reported hearing chanting, feeling strange vibrations, and seeing vivid, terrifying visions of ancient disasters within its depths. Some claimed the skull could change color or emit a strange white mist. But then science stepped in. In the 1970s, the skull was taken to the labs of Hewlett-Packard. The technicians there were baffled. They found that the skull was carved with total disregard for the crystal's axis, something that should have caused the quartz to shatter during the carving process. One researcher famously said, "This blinking thing shouldn't even exist." However, modern scanning technology in the early 2000s revealed a different, perhaps even more unsettling truth. Under high-powered electron microscopes, researchers found tiny, microscopic markings that could only have been made by high-speed, rotary diamond tools that didn't exist in the ancient Maya world. The evidence suggested the skull was a 19th-century creation, possibly made in Germany and sold as an ancient relic. So if it's a fake, why do archaeologists still refuse to touch it or include it in major exhibitions? Because the curse of the crystal skull isn't about its age, it's about its effect on the human mind. The Skull of Doom acts as a perfect optical lens. Because of how it was carved, it funnels light from the base directly through the eye sockets. If you stare into those crystal eyes for too long, the light patterns can trigger a form of self-hypnosis or hallucinations. Archaeologists often speak of the Stendhal syndrome, a physical illness caused by being exposed to an object of overwhelming beauty or mystery. The Mitchell Hedges skull is the ultimate trigger. Even knowing it might be a modern creation doesn't stop the feeling of being watched that many curators report. It has a weight of belief attached to it that makes it dangerous. There is a final, darker theory, that the skull was intended to be a vessel for collective human fear. Whether it was carved 3,000 years ago or 100 years ago, it has been the center of so much focused negative energy and belief in death that it has become charged. Today, the skull is kept in private hands, away from the general public. Most major museums, like the British Museum, have moved their own crystal skulls into storage, away from the main galleries. They say it's because they are frauds. But if you ask the people who have to move those crates, they'll tell you they don't care about the history. They just don't like the way the crystal eyes seem to follow them in the dark. Fake or not, the Skull of Doom still holds its power. And sometimes a lie told with enough conviction can be just as deadly as a real curse. In the heart of modern-day Mexico City, buried beneath the bustling streets and the Grand Cathedral, lies a place that was once the epicenter of a civilization's cosmic terror. Templo Mayor, the great temple of the Aztecs. At its summit stood two shrines, and before them, a low, volcanic stone altar known as a Tecatl. For centuries, this wasn't just a piece of architecture, it was a machine of death. Archaeologists today treat these altars with a specific kind of professional distance, a silence that borders on the sacred. Why? Because when you stand before a Tecatl, you aren't just looking at a relic. You are looking at a site where, according to some estimates, tens of thousands of people took their final breath. The ritual was as precise as it was horrific. 4 priests would hold the victim by their limbs, stretching their chest tight over the convex surface of the stone. A 5th priest, using a blade of razor-sharp volcanic glass, would make a single, swift incision. The heart, still beating, was ripped from the chest and offered to the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, to ensure that the world wouldn't end in eternal darkness. But the story doesn't end with the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521. The curse of Templo Mayor is felt by the very people who dig there today. Unlike Egyptian tombs, where the fear is often about invisible fungi, the threat here is psychological and visceral. The stone itself is porous. Volcanic basalt and andesite act like a sponge. When archaeologists first unearthed the main sacrificial stones in the late 20th century, they performed forensic tests on the rock. They found that the proteins from human blood had seeped so deeply into the microscopic pores of the stone that they were still detectable 500 years later. To touch the stone is to literally touch the biological remains of the victims. Many researchers who work in the sacred precinct report an overwhelming sense of heaviness or pressure in the air. There are stories of excavators who, after spending too much time clearing the dirt around the altars, suffer from sudden piercing chest pains, pains that doctors cannot explain. It's as if the site is echoing the trauma of the hearts it once claimed. Local workers often refuse to be alone in the excavation pits after the sun begins to set. They speak of the tzompantli, the skull racks, and how the shadows of the stones seem to move independently of the light. One leading archaeologist once remarked that the ground here is hungry. It's a feeling that the earth hasn't quite finished its work. And then there's the whistle of death. Archaeologists found small, skull-shaped clay whistles buried near these altars. When blown, they produce a sound that has been described as the scream of 1,000 corpses. Researchers who have studied the acoustics of Templo Mayor believe these whistles were used during the processions to the altar to shatter the willpower of the victims. Today, many museums keep these whistles in silent displays, refusing to let them be blown, fearing that the frequency of the sound might wake up the energy of the stones. There is a profound ethical debate in Mexican archaeology. Should these stones even be touched? Some believe that by cleaning them, by putting them under bright museum lights, we are stripping away the only thing they have left, their dark, terrible dignity. To an archaeologist, the Tecatl is a challenge to our understanding of civilization. It represents a society that believed blood was the only currency that could keep the universe alive. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you cannot deny the weight of that belief. When you stand near the altar at Templo Mayor, the air feels thin and the silence is deafening. It is a place where the past isn't just a memory, it's a physical, pulsing presence that demands you look away. The Aztecs believed the sun required hearts to rise. Standing there today, you might just find yourself checking your own pulse, wondering if the stone is still waiting for its next offering. In the deep, dark mythology of the Aztecs, death wasn't an end. It was a journey through 9 levels of a cold, terrifying underworld called Mictlan. And at the end of that journey, waiting in the darkness, was Mictlantecutli, the lord of the land of the dead. But what happens when that god of shadows takes on a physical form? Archaeologists at Templo Mayor discovered several masks that look like something out of a nightmare. These aren't carvings made of wood or clay. These are cranial masks. They are made from actual human skulls, the bone painstakingly cleaned, then inlaid with vibrant turquoise, obsidian eyes, and shells to create a face that is both beautiful and horrifying. To hold this mask is to hold the literal face of a person who lived 500 years ago, transformed into a god. And this is exactly why modern researchers treat them with a level of dread that few other artifacts command. Mictlantecuhtli was often depicted with his skin peeling off, his skeletal jaw hanging open to swallow the stars. The masks found by archaeologists capture this in-between state perfectly. The turquoise represents life, while the bone represents the eternal. But there's a dark biological secret to these masks. When forensic teams analyzed the bone, they found that these weren't just random skulls. They belonged to high-ranking warriors and nobles, and the marks on the bone suggest they were processed immediately after death. The curse associated with these masks is less about sudden death and more about interference. In the archives of the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico, there are persistent reports of electronic equipment failing whenever these masks are being photographed or scanned. Cameras refuse to focus. Digital files become corrupted for no apparent reason. It's as if the Lord of the Underworld refuses to have his image captured by modern technology. But the psychological effect is even stronger. Imagine being an archaeologist in a dimly lit storage room, opening a drawer and seeing those obsidian eyes staring back at you. Obsidian, for the Aztecs, was a smoking mirror, a material used for scrying and looking into the future. Many curators report that if you look into the obsidian pupils of the mask for too long, you lose your sense of time. You begin to feel a pulling sensation, as if your own life force is being weighed against the cold weight of the bone. There is a ritualistic heaviness to these masks. They were often found buried in offerings, along with sacrificial knives and the bones of eagles. They weren't meant to be seen by the living, they were meant to guard the foundations of the temple, keeping the balance between our world and the underworld. By digging them up, archaeologists have effectively broken a 500-year-old seal. One famous story involves a researcher who was studying the nerve paths carved into the bone of a Mictlantecuhtli mask. That night, he dreamt of a colossal figure standing at the foot of his bed, silent and skinless, demanding the return of his face. The researcher was so shaken that he refused to work on the project again. It's a common theme, the feeling that by studying these masks, you are inviting an ancient, hungry presence into your own life. Even today, when these masks are moved for international exhibitions, they are handled with a silence that is unusual for museum workers. There is no joking, no lighthearted talk. There is only a profound respect for the Lord of the Dead. The takeaway here is simple. The Aztecs didn't fear death. They respected its power. They knew that once you put on the mask of Mictlantecuhtli, there is no coming back. We look at these masks as art, but they were designed as gateways. And as any archaeologist will tell you, sometimes it's better not to know what's waiting on the other side of the gate. If you ever see those turquoise teeth and obsidian eyes in a museum, remember, you aren't just looking at history. You are looking at the face that, according to the Aztecs, we will all have to meet eventually. And he isn't in a hurry. He has all the time in the world. Rising from the jungle floor of the Yucatan Peninsula, El Castillo, the Pyramid of Kukulcán, is a masterpiece of ancient geometry. We've all seen the pictures. The shadow of the serpent crawling down the stairs during the equinox. But there is a secret side to this pyramid that the millions of tourists who visit Chichen Itza never get to see. In 1930, archaeologists discovered that El Castillo is like a Russian nesting doll. Inside the outer pyramid lies a second, older temple, and deep within that inner sanctum, at the top of a narrow, humid stone staircase, they found a room that wasn't meant for human eyes. Inside sat a throne carved from a single block of limestone, painted a vivid, blood red, and shaped like a snarling jaguar. Its eyes, 74 discs of pure green jade that seemed to glow in the dark. This is the Red Jaguar throne. And since 2006, the Mexican government has officially banned anyone from entering the inner chamber. While the official reason is preservation and safety, Many who have spent time inside that cramped, airless room tell a different story. They speak of a jaguar's curse, a psychological and physical weight that guards the heart of the pyramid. To reach the jaguar, you have to climb a staircase so narrow and steep that it induces instant claustrophobia. The humidity inside is nearly 100%, and the air is thick with the smell of wet stone and ancient dust. Archaeologists who led the early excavations reported that the atmosphere inside wasn't just uncomfortable. It was aggressive. Many suffered from sudden, intense panic attacks, claiming they felt the walls closing in, or worse, that something was breathing behind them in the dark. The jaguar itself is a terrifying object. The red paint is made from cinnabar, a mineral containing mercury. For decades, researchers handled the throne without realizing they were slowly being poisoned by toxic vapors. But beyond the chemical danger, there is the spiritual one. In Maya belief, the jaguar was the lord of the underworld, capable of moving between the realms of the living and the dead. The throne was a portal. There are chilling accounts from the last few guards allowed inside before the 2006 closure. They reported that the jade eyes of the jaguar would shift. Not that the stones moved, but that the expression in the eyes would change from a dull stone to a predatory glare. Some claimed they heard a low, guttural growl vibrating through the floorboards, a sound that matched the frequency of a large feline. In 1990, a group of researchers attempted to use ground-penetrating radar inside the chamber. The equipment, which had worked perfectly outside, suddenly began to malfunction. The screens filled with static, and the data showed ghost structures, rooms and tunnels that didn't physically exist according to their maps. It was as if the pyramid was hiding its true shape from modern sensors. Local Maya descendants who work at the site today still leave offerings of tobacco and honey at the base of the pyramid. They believe that the hexes, mischievous and sometimes dangerous spirits, guard the red jaguar. They warn that the inner temple is tired of being poked and prodded by outsiders. When a tourist fell to her death from the exterior steps in 2006, it was the final straw. The authorities sealed the tunnel leading to the jaguar. Today, that red throne sits in total darkness, its 74 jade eyes staring at a wall that no one is allowed to cross. Archaeologists today treat El Castillo with a look but don't touch policy. They use drones and remote sensors because the human cost of entering that inner sanctum has become too high. Is it the mercury in the paint? Is it the crushing humidity? Or is it the fact that we've disturbed a king's seat that was never meant to be empty? The red jaguar remains one of the few artifacts in this world that has successfully pushed humanity back. It reclaimed its throne in the dark, reminding us that some parts of history are not for our consumption. They are for the gods. And the gods do not like to share. In the rugged, untamed mountains of Arcadia, Greece, there is a power that doesn't reside in temples of marble and gold. It lives in the shadows of the trees, in the sudden silence of a forest, and in the ancient stone statues of a deity who is half man, half goat. This is Pan, the god of the wild, of shepherds, and of a primal, irrational terror that we still call panic. Archaeologists who specialize in Greek antiquity often treat sites dedicated to Pan differently than they do the Parthenon. While the temples of Athena or Apollo feel like monuments to human reason, the shrines of Pan feel like a descent into the animal brain. And there is one specific ancient statue of Pan, found in a remote cave in the Arcadian highlands, that researchers have described as unbearable to be near. The statue isn't elegant. It's rough, earthy, and depicts Pan with a leering, chaotic grin and a gaze that seems to vibrate with a disturbing sexual and violent energy. But the curse of Pan isn't a spell written on a scroll. It is a biological and psychological reaction to the environment he represents. The term panic comes from the belief that Pan, when disturbed from his midday nap, would let out a shout so terrifying that it caused hearts to stop and armies to flee in mindless stampedes. Modern archaeologists who have attempted to excavate his grottos report a strange, recurring phenomenon: silent panic. Without any warning, entire teams have been known to drop their tools and run out of the caves, unable to explain why they felt an overwhelming sense of impending doom. Is it a gas leak? Is it infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that the human ear can't hear, but the body feels as intense anxiety? Geologists have searched for these answers, but the results are always inconclusive. What remains is the testimony of the experts. One lead researcher noted that while cleaning the Pan statue, he felt a rhythm, a thumping like a heavy heartbeat coming from the very ground beneath his feet. There is a historical heaviness to Pan. Unlike the other gods who moved to Mount Olympus, Pan stayed in the dirt. He is the only Greek god who is said to have actually died. When a sailor in the era of Tiberius heard a voice across the water crying out, "The great god Pan is dead," it marked the end of the old world. But archaeologists believe Pan didn't die, he was just buried. And he is very angry about it. In the 19th century, a British collector tried to remove a smaller Pan figure from an Arcadian shrine. Within days, his local guides vanished, claiming the goatfoot was hunting them. The collector himself was found weeks later, wandering the hills, unable to speak. His hair turned white from shock. He died without ever explaining what he saw in the shadows of the Arcadia oaks. Today, many Pan artifacts are kept in open-air museums or left in the caves where they were found. Curators have observed that these statues seem to attract wild incidents. Equipment failure is common, but more disturbingly, people's behavior changes. Calm, rational scientists find themselves snapping at one another, overwhelmed by sudden animalistic aggression. Archaeologists refuse to perform deep excavations in the core areas of Arcadia, dedicated to Pan, because the land itself seems to resist. Landslides, sudden freak storms, and equipment being lost in the thick undergrowth are too frequent to be mere coincidence. It's as if the god of the wild is reclaiming his territory stone by stone. We like to think we are masters of nature, but the statue of Pan stands as a reminder that underneath our clothes and our technology, we are still animals. And animals know when they are being hunted. To touch a Pan statue is to invite that primal raw chaos back into your mind. It is to remember what it feels like to be afraid of the dark. And for many experts, that is a discovery they are not willing to make. Pan is still there, napping in the silence of Arcadia, and for the sake of your sanity, you'd better let him sleep. We have traveled from the tombs of Egypt to the jungles of Mexico, but our final destination brings us to the most sacred and dangerous spot in the ancient Greek world, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the Greeks believed they had found the omphalos, the literal navel of the earth. But deep within the foundations of this temple lies a restricted area that even modern archaeologists approach with extreme trepidation. It is called the Aditon, a word that literally translates to the place not to be entered. For over 1,000 years, this was the seat of the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. She was a woman who sat on a bronze tripod over a dark chasm in the earth, inhaling strange vapors to deliver prophecies that decided the fate of empires. But when the temple was officially excavated in the 1890s, French archaeologists expected to find a massive cave or a deep volcanic vent. Instead, they found almost nothing, just a confusing mess of faults and cracks in the limestone. For a long time, science dismissed the oracle's magic as a myth. But in the early 2000s, a team of geologists and toxicologists decided to look deeper, and what they found was a physical curse that still lingers in the air today. The temple is built directly over the intersection of two major geological fault lines. Deep underground, friction and heat release a cocktail of gases, specifically ethylene, ethane, and methane. Ethylene is a powerful hallucinogen. In small doses, it causes a state of euphoria. But in a confined, unventilated space like the Aditon, it is a poison that induces violent seizures, frantic screaming, and, eventually, total mental collapse. This is the curse that archaeologists refuse to touch today. The Aditon isn't just a historical site, it's an active geological trap. Even now, gas levels in the lower foundations can spike without warning. There are records of modern researchers who, despite wearing safety monitors, have reported sudden bouts of Delphic madness, a feeling of intense pressure in the skull, followed by vivid, auditory hallucinations. They hear voices in the wind that sounds like the python, the legendary serpent Apollo was said to have slain at this very spot. But there is a deeper mystery. Ancient texts speak of a chasm that led directly to the underworld, a hole so deep it had no bottom. During the late Roman era, the temple was desecrated, and this chasm was filled in with tons of rubble and lead to seal it forever. Modern archaeologists have debated reopening this deep shaft to see what lies at the bottom. But the consensus among the Greek authorities has been a firm no. Why? Because Delphi is a place where the earth still speaks. Beyond the toxic gas, there's the infrasound effect. The unique shape of the mountains around Delphi creates low-frequency sound waves that resonate within the temple's foundations. These frequencies can trigger a fear response in the human amygdala, causing a sensation of a supernatural presence. To dig deeper is to risk the structural integrity of the site, and perhaps to release concentrations of gas that haven't seen the light of day in 2,000 years. There is a final, chilling story. In the 2nd century AD, a group of frustrated priests forced the oracle to go into the Aditon, even though the omens were bad. She descended, but instead of a prophecy, she let out a scream that was heard throughout the valley. She ran out of the chamber, collapsed, and died days later, claiming she had seen the shadow of the god instead of his light. Today, the inner sanctum of Delphi remains a restricted access zone for deep excavation. We have the technology to drill down, to use robots to clear the rubble, but we don't. We have learned to respect the Aditon. We have learned that some places on this planet are thin, places where the gas, the sound, and the history combine to create a reality that our modern minds simply cannot handle. The oracle is silent now, but the earth at Delphi is still breathing. And as our 12th and final artifact, it serves as the ultimate takeaway. Archaeology is the study of what we have found, but wisdom is knowing what to leave buried. If you thought the cursed artifacts were unsettling, prepare yourselves. We've merely scratched the surface of humanity's perilous past. Now, we delve deeper into the forbidden. These aren't just objects of ill fortune. They are relics so volatile, so profoundly dangerous, that scientific minds worldwide agree they must never be touched. Welcome to the Forbidden Zone. Imagine standing in Xi'an, China, in 1974. A group of farmers is digging a well hoping for water, but instead they strike something hard. Something made of clay. They had no idea they had just stumbled upon the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century, and perhaps the most dangerous. This is the Terracotta Army. Over 8,000 life-size soldiers, horses, and chariots, each with a unique face, standing in battle formation. They were built to protect Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, in the afterlife. But while the soldiers are world-famous, it's what lies beyond them that keeps modern scientists awake at night. The soldiers are just the perimeter. The real mystery is the emperor's central tomb. Despite having the technology to dig it up, the Chinese government hasn't touched it in 50 years. Why? Because it's not just a grave, it's a lethal trap. According to ancient records, by the historian Sima Qian, the emperor's tomb is a miniature replica of his empire, complete with palaces, towers, and most incredibly, rivers and seas made of flowing liquid mercury. For decades, people thought this was just a myth, a legend to scare away tomb raiders. But modern soil analysis has proven otherwise. Scientists have detected mercury levels in the surrounding soil that are hundreds of times higher than normal. Think about that. If you open that tomb, you aren't just looking at history. You are walking into a cloud of highly toxic mercury vapor. It would be an environmental and biological disaster. But the danger isn't just chemical. It's structural. The tomb was designed with elaborate booby traps. Ancient texts describe auto-firing crossbows triggered by hidden floor plates, designed to pierce any intruder. Even if the wooden mechanisms have rotted over 2,000 years, the psychological weight of these traps remains. And then there's the preservation crisis. When the first terracotta soldiers were unearthed, their vibrant colors, reds, purples, and blues, vanished in seconds. The moment they hit the dry air, the lacquer curled and flaked off. Opening the main chamber could mean destroying the emperor's final resting place forever within minutes of exposure to oxygen. So we have a tomb filled with neurotoxic mercury, potential ancient traps, and treasures that might crumble if we breathe on them. Qin Shi Huang wanted to live forever, and in a way, his tomb has achieved a terrifying kind of immortality. It is a place where time stands still, guarded by a poison that flows like water. It's not that we can't move it, it's that we dare not. The emperor still rules his silent empire, and for now, the world is content to stay outside the door. Deep within the heart of Bengal, where the humid air hangs heavy with the scent of incense and marigolds, resides a power that has terrified and fascinated the world for millennia. We are talking about the ancient Kali statue. But this isn't just a piece of religious art. In the eyes of the locals and those who guard her, she is a living, breathing force, and one that is far too dangerous to move. To understand why, you first have to look at her. Kali is the Hindu goddess of time, creation, destruction, and power. She is often depicted with deep blue or midnight black skin, a tongue protruding in a moment of cosmic realization, and a garland of human heads around her neck. She represents the ultimate truth, that time consumes all things. But the ancient statues found in the remote temples of Bengal carry a specific, heavy energy that modern archaeology struggles to explain. There's a story told by the village elders about a colonial-era attempt to relocate one such statue to a museum in Europe. The officials arrived with heavy machinery and chains, dismissing the warnings of the temple priests as mere superstition. As soon as the first chain was tightened, the sky, which had been clear seconds before, turned a bruised purple. A freak storm rolled in with such violence that the machinery sank into the mud. Men fell ill with sudden, unexplainable fevers. The project was abandoned within 48 hours. The statue didn't just stay. It refused to leave. Archaeologically, these statues are often carved from a specific type of black stone that seems to vibrate at a frequency different from the surrounding earth. Some researchers suggest that the placement of these icons isn't accidental. They are situated on what some call ley lines or intersections of intense geomagnetic activity. Moving the statue, the locals believe, would be like pulling a vital component out of a nuclear reactor. It wouldn't just break the statue, it would rupture the spiritual and physical equilibrium of the entire region. But the danger isn't just in the physics or the weather. It's in the prana pratishta, the ritual of breath. In Bengal, a Kali statue isn't considered finished until a high priest performs a ceremony to invite the deity's essence into the stone. Once this happens, the statue is no longer an object. It is a guest. And you don't just put a guest of that magnitude into a wooden crate and ship them across the ocean. There are accounts of the curse of the unseen. Individuals who have attempted to steal or desecrate these icons often report a sensation of being watched by 1,000 eyes. Some have suffered from the heavy chest, a feeling that the very gravity around them has increased, making it impossible to breathe. Is it psychological? Is it the power of suggestion? Or is there something about the geometry and the material of these ancient relics that interacts with the human nervous system in ways we don't yet understand? In the shadows of the temple, the priests will tell you that Kali is the mother who protects, but she is also the fire that consumes. They believe the statue remains in its place because it is tethered to the ground by the blood of the earth itself. To move her is to invite pralaya, total dissolution. Scientists might call it magnetic interference or cultural taboo. The devotees call it divine presence. But whatever you choose to believe, the fact remains. These statues stay where they were placed centuries ago. They sit in the dark, draped in red hibiscus flowers, staring out with wide, unblinking eyes, waiting for the end of time. And as long as they stay there, the world remains in balance. But the moment we try to claim her for a museum shelf, that is a risk no one is truly willing to take. In the world of Japanese swords, one name stands above all others for its beauty, Masamune. But there is another name that samurai only whispered in fear, a name synonymous with madness, bloodlust, and tragedy. Muramasa Sengo. To look at a Muramasa blade is to look at a masterpiece of metallurgy. The waves on the steel, the heimin, are perfectly symmetrical, mirroring each other on both sides of the blade. They are incredibly sharp, capable of slicing a fallen leaf in two. But in Japan, these aren't just weapons. They are considered uyo no to, evil swords. And for centuries, they were so dangerous that owning one was a crime punishable by death. The legend begins with the man himself. Muramasa was said to be a brilliant but violent and unstable swordsmith. It was believed that while he forged his steel, he poured his own burning rage and madness into the metal. The result, a blade that had a soul, but a soul that was never satisfied. The stories are chilling. It is said that once a Muramasa blade is drawn, it demands blood before it can be returned to its scabbard. If the wielder did not kill an enemy, the sword would force them to cut themselves, or worse, turn the blade on a friend or family member. It was as if the steel had a hunger that the user could not control. This wasn't just folklore. The Tokugawa shogunate, the military government that ruled Japan for over 250 years, officially banned Muramasa blades. Why? Because they seemed cursed specifically to destroy the Tokugawa family. The shogun's grandfather was killed by a Muramasa. His father was wounded by one. Even the shogun himself accidentally cut his hand on a Muramasa blade. To the ruling class, these weren't just coincidences. The blades were seen as spiritual assassins, waiting for the moment to strike. During the Great Purge, thousands of Muramasa blades were destroyed, hidden, or had their signatures erased to avoid the executioner's axe. But some survived. And this is where the forbidden part of the archaeology comes in. Modern collectors and museum curators who handle these blades often report a strange, chilling sensation. It's not a physical danger like a trap or poison, but something psychological. There is a documented phenomenon where people feel an overwhelming urge to test the edge, a sudden spike in aggression when the cold steel touches their palm. Scientists might call it the Lucifer effect, or the power of myth. But for the experts in Tokyo, the protocol is clear. These blades are kept under strict lock and key. They are rarely moved, and when they are, it is done with intense spiritual ritual. They are never displayed in a way that allows them to be easily unsheathed. Because even today, in a world of silicon and satellites, there is a lingering fear that the madness of Muramasa Sengo is still vibrating inside that steel. Moving a Muramasa isn't just moving a relic. It's transporting a 500-year-old hunger. It is a reminder that sometimes the things we create can end up owning us. The blades sit in their silk-lined boxes, silent and terrifyingly sharp, waiting. And as long as they stay sheathed, the world is safe from their ancient, metallic rage. If you travel to the Nara prefecture in Japan, you will find a place where time seems to have surrendered. Horyoji, the Temple of the Flourishing Law. It is home to some of the oldest wooden structures on the planet, standing strong for over 1,300 years. But deep within its silent corridors hangs an object that possesses a power far beyond its physical form. The Horyoji bell. At first glance, it looks like any other ancient temple bell. Heavy bronze, green with the patina of centuries, decorated with celestial motifs. But this bell is never moved. It is rarely rung. And in the world of forbidden archaeology, it is whispered that the bell is not just a relic, it is a stabilizer for the very earth it sits upon. The story goes back to the foundation of the temple by Prince Shotoku. It is said that the bell was cast with a specific alloy and tuned to a frequency that matches the Om, the primordial sound of the universe. For over a millennium, the monks have guarded it with a devotion that borders on obsession. Why? Because according to local prophecy, if the bell is moved from its consecrated spot, the protection over the land will shatter. In the 19th century, during a period of intense modernization, there were whispers of moving the bell to a national collection. Local legends say that the night the proposal was made, the ground beneath the temple began to moan. A series of minor tremors localized only around the belfry convinced the authorities that some things are tied to the earth by more than just gravity. But there is a scientific layer to this mystery that is even more fascinating. Modern acoustic researchers have studied the resonance of ancient bronze bells. They've discovered that certain frequencies can actually affect human brainwaves and even the structural integrity of ancient wood. The Horyuji structures are made of cypress, wood that is technically dead but still breathes and reacts to vibrations. It is believed that the specific tone of this bell, when struck at the correct intervals, actually helps preserve the molecular structure of the surrounding wooden pagodas. To move the bell is to silence the vibration that has kept these buildings standing through 1,000 years of earthquakes and storms. It is a biological and architectural symphony. Archaeologists who have visited the site speak of a hush that surrounds the bell, a zone of silence where the air feels thicker. There's a psychological weight to it. You don't just see the bell, you feel it in your marrow. The monks believe that the bell holds the karmic memory of the nation. To transport it like a common piece of scrap metal would be to sever the connection between the past and the future. In the 1920s, a researcher reportedly tried to take a small rubbing of the bell's inscription without permission. He claimed that the moment his paper touched the bronze, a sound like a low, subterranean growl vibrated through his boots, though the bell never moved an inch. He left empty-handed, convinced that the bell was aware. Today, the Horyuji bell remains exactly where it was placed over a dozen centuries ago. It is a relic that is too dangerous to move because it is more than an object. It is a guardian of resonance. It teaches us that some things are not meant to be possessed or displayed in a museum gallery. They are meant to stay rooted, humming their silent song, keeping the world from falling apart. As the sun sets over Nara, the bell remains silent, but its presence is a thunderous reminder. Some vibrations are better left undisturbed. Throughout history, no relic has inspired more obsession, blood, and cinematic wonder than the Ark of the Covenant. According to the Hebrew Bible, it is a gold-plated wooden chest containing the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. But for those who study forbidden archaeology, the Ark isn't just a religious symbol, it is a lethal piece of ancient technology. A relic so dangerous that for 3,000 years, anyone who touched it without protection was said to be struck dead by fire from the heavens. The Ark has been missing since the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 587 BC. But if you travel to the city of Aksum in Ethiopia, you'll find a small building called the Chapel of the Tablet. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims the Ark is there, right now. But there's a catch. You can't see it. No one can. Only one person is allowed in the presence of the Ark, the guardian monk. Once chosen, he is confined to the chapel for the rest of his life. He cannot leave, and he cannot be replaced until he dies. And here's the terrifying part. The monks who guard the Ark often develop cataracts, skin lesions, and strange illnesses shortly after taking their post. Modern researchers have a startling theory. They suggest the Ark wasn't just a box, but a massive electrical capacitor. Think about the construction. Gold is a perfect conductor, and wood is a perfect insulator. If the Ark functioned like a Leyden jar, it could have accumulated a massive static charge of thousands of volts. This would explain why the Bible gives strict instructions on how to move it, using wooden poles inserted through gold rings so the priests never touched the main body. It also explains why Uzzah, a man in the Bible, was instantly killed when he reached out to steady the Ark as it tilted. He grounded the circuit. But the danger in Aksum might be even more modern. Some fringe theorists and scientists who've analyzed the guardian monk's symptoms suggest that the Ark might be radioactive. If the stones inside were a source of high-energy particles, the chapel wouldn't just be a temple. It would be a containment chamber. This is why the relic is considered too dangerous to move. To transport it would be to risk a radioactive leak or an electrical discharge that we simply don't have the protocols to handle. Beyond the physical danger, there is the geopolitical powder keg. The Ark is the ultimate prize for 3 of the world's major religions. If anyone attempted to move it or even prove its existence with modern scans, it could trigger a global conflict. The secrecy isn't just about religious tradition, it's a matter of global security. In the 1940s, it was rumored that various intelligence agencies attempted to gain access to the chapel. All were rebuffed. The The monks don't care about science or politics. They care about the presence. They believe that the Ark is the footstool of God on earth, and that its power is too raw, too holy, and too destructive for a world that has forgotten how to handle the divine. So the Ark remains in Aksum, hidden behind a modest stone wall, guarded by a man who is slowly dying from its proximity. It is a relic that science wants to study, but humanity is terrified to touch. It is the ultimate forbidden object, a bridge between the world of men and a power that doesn't play by our rules. As long as it stays in that chapel, the secret is safe. But if it ever leaves, the world might just find out what the wrath of God actually looks like in a lab report. Deep within the fortified walls of Edinburgh Castle, behind layered glass and ironclad security, sits the honours of Scotland. Among them is the crown of King James VI, a masterpiece of gold, silver, and precious gemstones. It is the oldest crown jewel in the British Isles. But don't let its beauty deceive you. In the world of forbidden archaeology, this crown is considered active. It carries a weight that isn't measured in carats, but in the dark history of the monarchs who wore it. The story of this crown is a story of survival, but at a terrible cost. James VI was a king obsessed with the supernatural. He wrote a famous book on demonology and led some of the most brutal witch hunts in history. Legends say that during his reign, the crown was cleansed with rituals that many would consider dark today. The belief was that the crown wasn't just a symbol of the king's authority, but a vessel for the divine right, a literal connection to the heavens that no commoner could survive touching. There is a chilling record from the 17th century. During the English Civil War, the crown was hidden to prevent it from being destroyed by Oliver Cromwell's forces. It was buried under the floorboards of a church and moved in secret by commoners. Legend has it that those who handled the crown without the royal blood suffered a string of bizarre tragedies. One man reportedly lost his sight within days. Another fell into a permanent state of melancholy, claiming he could hear the whispers of dead kings whenever he was near the relic. But why is it too dangerous to move today? Beyond its immense historical value, there is a lingering protocol in Scottish heritage. In 1818, the famous writer Sir Walter Scott rediscovered the crown after it had been locked away in a chest for over a century. When he finally opened the chest, the air in the room supposedly turned freezing. One of the men in the room reached out to jokingly place the crown on a young lady's head. Scott allegedly screamed, "No, by God!" stopping him just in time. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a premonition that to treat this object as a mere hat would invite a national catastrophe. Modern museum curators handle the crown with extreme, almost ritualistic care. They use specialized gloves, not just to protect the gold, but to maintain the sanctity of the object. There are stories whispered among the castle guards about the room of the crown. They claim that late at night, the air around the display case vibrates with a low, hum-like frequency. Some say it's the ventilation, others say it's the crown itself, still pulsing with the energy of a king who believed he was an instrument of God. There is also a physical danger. Ancient gemstones, particularly those in crowns that have been buried or hidden in damp conditions, can harbor rare types of fungi or chemical outgassing from the degrading alloys used in the 1500s. To move it without a vacuum-sealed environment is to risk destroying the relic and potentially exposing handlers to ancient pathogens. But the real reason we don't move it is symbolic. This crown represents the soul of a nation that refused to be conquered. To move it from its place in Edinburgh is seen as an act of spiritual surrender. It stays on its velvet cushion, staring back at the thousands of tourists who pass by. A golden circle that has seen heads fall and empires rise. It is a reminder that some objects are so saturated with the blood and belief of history that they become more than metal. They become a warning. Some burdens are too heavy for any one person to carry. In 1831, on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, a sand dune collapsed after a fierce storm, revealing a small stone chamber. Inside, tucked away like a dark secret, sat 78 chess pieces carved from walrus ivory and whale's teeth. But these weren't the abstract shapes we recognize today. These were tiny, detailed figures with wide, staring eyes and expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. To look at the Lewis chessmen is to feel someone, or something, looking back at you. The kings clutch their swords with white-knuckled intensity. The queens hold their faces in their hands, looking as if they've just witnessed a massacre. And the warders, the rooks, are biting their shields in a state of berserker rage. Archaeologists believe they were carved in Norway around the 12th century, likely lost or hidden by a merchant traveling to Ireland. But there is a reason these pieces are often displayed behind thick glass and rarely moved together as a full set. There is an unsettling energy reported by those who spend too much time in their presence. Local folklore on the island suggests the chessmen weren't just carvings, they were containment vessels. Legend says that a young shepherd found the stash first, but he was so terrified by the soulless gaze of the ivory men that he fled, believing he had stumbled upon a gathering of small demons. Shortly after, he met a violent end. When the pieces were eventually sold and scattered, a string of bad luck followed the buyers. Bankruptcies, sudden illnesses, and a sense of being followed by small, ivory footsteps. But the real forbidden aspect of the Lewis chessmen lies in their psychological impact. Modern curators have noticed that when the pieces are arranged in a full battle formation, the atmosphere in the room shifts. It's known as the staring effect. The way the eyes are carved, deep and hollow, creates an optical illusion where they seem to follow you from every angle. It triggers a primal fight or flight response in the human brain. There is also the physical fragility. Walrus ivory is a biological material that has spent 700 years buried in cold, damp sand. It has reached a delicate equilibrium with the earth. To move them frequently, or to expose them to the natural oils of human skin, is to risk the weeping of the ivory, a process where the material cracks and releases trapped bacteria from the medieval era. Archaeologists often debate why they were buried in the first place. Were they hidden from thieves? Or were they exorcised? Buried in a stone chamber because the owner realized that playing a game with these pieces meant inviting their grim expressions into his own life? Today, they are split between the British Museum and the National Museum of Scotland. They are moved only with the highest level of vibration-dampening technology. Because as any grandmaster will tell you, a game of chess is a battle of minds. But with the Lewis chessmen, it feels like the battle is already over. And we are just looking at the survivors of a nightmare. They stay in their cases, their eyes wide, their shields raised, waiting for a game that should never be played again. In the heart of the Louvre, among the glittering crowns and royal regalia of France, rests a blade that supposedly forged an empire. Joyeuse, the personal sword of Charlemagne, the father of Europe. For over 1,000 years, this weapon was used in the coronation ceremonies of French kings, from Philip the Bold to Charles X. But Joyeuse is not just a masterpiece of gold and steel. In the world of forbidden archaeology, it is a relic of shifting nature. An object so tied to the identity of a nation that moving it feels like disturbing the fabric of time itself. The legends surrounding Joyeuse are as sharp as its edge. Ancient chronicles claim the sword was forged from the same metal as the Spear of Destiny. It was said to change its color 30 times a day, glowing with a celestial light that blinded Charlemagne's enemies on the battlefield. But there is a darker side to this brilliance. The sword was believed to be bound to the fate of the monarch. If the sword was bright, the empire was safe. If it grew dull, blood would soon flow in the streets of Paris. Archaeologists face a massive headache when studying Joyeuse. Why? Because the sword is a Frankenstein of history. The pommel dates back to the 10th century, the crossguard to the 12th, and the scabbard even later. It is a relic that has been reborn multiple times. But the core, the blade itself, remains a mystery. Some metallurgical scans suggest the innermost steel is far older than the decorations surrounding it. It's as if the sword has been constantly fed new parts to keep its ancient spirit alive. So, why is it too dangerous to move? First, there is the sovereignty curse. Throughout French history, whenever Joyeuse was moved far from its place of rest or handled by those without legitimate power, chaos followed. During the French Revolution, the sword was seized, and shortly after, the nation descended into the reign of terror. It is as if the blade possesses a monarchical gravity. It demands a stable, orderly environment, and when that stability is broken, the relic radiates a sense of unrest. Modern curators treat Joyeuse with a level of caution that borders on the religious. It is kept in a climate-controlled vacuum, but the danger isn't just rust. It's the physical integrity of the composite parts. Because the sword is made of different alloys from different centuries, they expand and contract at different rates. Moving it, subjecting it to the slight vibrations of transport or changes in atmospheric pressure, could cause the sword to literally shatter itself from the inside out. The gold would pull away from the iron, the gems would reject their settings. But beyond the physics, there is the shadow of the emperor. Guards at the Louvre have whispered about a strange phenomenon near the Joyeuse display. On certain nights, the light reflected off the blade doesn't match the lamps in the room. It's as if the sword is still shifting colors, flickering with a ghost of the light Charlemagne once carried into battle. To move Joyeuse is to risk breaking the most important link in European history. It is a relic that stays put because it is the anchor of a 1,000-year-old story. It reminds us that power is fragile, and some symbols are so heavy with the ghosts of kings that they are better left exactly where they are. Behind the glass, silent and still glowing with a light we can no longer explain. Deep in the mist-shrouded forests of Romania, there is a place called the Snagov Monastery. It sits on a tiny island surrounded by dark, freezing waters. To most, it is a place of prayer. But for historians and fans of the macabre, it is the site of one of the greatest mysteries in forbidden archaeology, the tomb of Vlad III, better known to the world as Dracula. But here's the problem. The tomb is a lie, or perhaps it's a warning. In the early 20th century, archaeologists decided to do the unthinkable. They decided to open the final resting place of the impaler. They expected to find a body clad in royal silks, perhaps a silver sword, or at the very least, a skeleton. But when the heavy stone slab was finally pried open, the air in the monastery reportedly turned foul. Inside the coffin, there was no prince. There was only a collection of horse bones and ancient rubbish. Where is the real body of the man who inspired the greatest vampire legend in history? This is where the archaeology becomes forbidden. There are local legends in Transylvania that claim Vlad's body was never meant to be found. They believe his remains were moved to a second, secret location. A hidden heart buried deep beneath the earth, protected by a curse of blood. The people of the region refuse to speak of its location. They believe that to move the real coffin, wherever it may be, is to disturb a slumbering malice that the world isn't prepared to face. Modern researchers who have tried to use ground-penetrating radar in the forests surrounding his castles often report strange equipment failures. Batteries that were full suddenly die. GPS signals move in circles. Skeptics call it magnetic interference from the mountains. Locals call it the cloaking. But why is the idea of moving his remains so dangerous? Beyond the myth of the vampire, Vlad III was a man of extreme violence. His death was a decapitation, his head sent to Constantinople as a trophy. In the belief system of the time, a body buried without its head, or in an unholy manner, becomes a strigoi, a restless spirit. Archaeology in this region isn't just about digging, it's about navigating a landscape of active fear. In the 1970s, a team of researchers allegedly found a hidden chamber beneath a ruined fortress. They reported finding a heavy, lead-lined casket. But before it could be excavated, the project was shut down by the authorities without explanation. The records were sealed. Rumors swirled that the team had suffered a string of accidental deaths, much like those who opened the tomb of Tutankhamun. To move the coffin of Vlad III is to invite a psychological and cultural trauma back into the world. It is a relic that stays lost, because in a way, we want it to stay lost. We prefer the mystery to the reality. The empty tomb at Snagov stands as a reminder. Some men were so terrifying in life that even in death, their absence is more powerful than their presence. The coffin, if it exists, is too dangerous to move because it represents the point where history ends and folklore begins. It is a void that refuses to be filled. And as the wind howls through the ruins of Poenari Castle, you realize that some graves aren't kept closed to keep the world out. They are kept closed to keep what's inside in, because as long as he is nowhere, he is everywhere. In the National Library of Sweden, there sits a book so massive it requires two people to lift it. It's called the Codex Gigas, the giant book. It is 36 inches tall and contains the entire Bible, medical treatises, and magical incantations. But it isn't the size that makes it forbidden. It is the legend of its creation, and a single, terrifying page that has earned it the name, the Devil's Bible. The story takes us back to the 13th century, to a monastery in Bohemia. A monk, having broken his vows, was sentenced to be walled up alive. In a desperate bid for his life, he promised to write a book that would contain all human knowledge in a single night. As midnight approached, realizing the task was impossible, the monk didn't pray to God. He prayed to the fallen angel. Legend says the devil answered, completing the 310 pages of parchment, but leaving a self-portrait on page 290 as a signature of his work. When you look at that page, the energy in the room seems to change. It is a full-page illustration of a green-faced clawed demon staring out with an expression of bizarre, eternal triumph. But here is where the forbidden archaeology starts to get real. For centuries, this book was moved from monastery to castle to library, and every single place that housed it suffered a catastrophe. In 1648, the Swedish army looted it from Prague. Shortly after, the royal palace in Stockholm, where the book was kept, burned to the ground. Legend says the book was thrown out of a window to save it from the flames, and as it fell, it supposedly landed with such force that it caused the ground to tremble. Why is it too dangerous to move today? Modern forensic handwriting analysis has revealed something impossible. The entire book, every letter, every decoration, was written by a single person. But based on the consistency of the ink and the penmanship, it would have taken 30 years of non-stop writing to complete. Yet, the handwriting doesn't show any signs of aging, fatigue, or illness from the beginning to the end. It is as if the writer was frozen in time, or, as the legend suggests, it truly was written in one supernatural burst of energy. Scientists who study the Codex Gigas are extremely hesitant to move it for more than just historical reasons. The vellum is made from the skins of 160 donkeys. It is hypersensitive to light and humidity. But there's a psychological barrier too. Curators have noted that those who study the Devil's Page for too long report a sense of profound spiritual exhaustion. There are dead zones of sound around the book, where the air feels unnaturally still. In the world of the occult, the Codex Gigas is believed to be an active gateway. Moving it, according to some, is like shifting a cornerstone of a dark cathedral. It stays in its climate-controlled, low-light vault, guarded by modern sensors and ancient fears. Is it just a masterpiece of medieval dedication? Or is it a contract signed in ink and shadows? We don't move the Codex Gigas because we don't want to find out what happens when the giant is disturbed. It sits there, open to its most famous page, a silent monument to a night when a man traded his soul for a pen. In the world of the paranormal, some objects are haunted. Others are something much worse. They are containers. This is the Dybbuk box, a simple, unassuming wine cabinet that became the most haunted object of the internet age. But for those who have owned it, the joke ended very, very quickly. It is a relic of forbidden archaeology, not because of its age, but because of what is trapped inside. A Dybbuk, a restless, malicious spirit from Jewish folklore, capable of possessing the living. The story began in 2001 when a restoration artist bought the box at an estate sale. The previous owner was a Holocaust survivor who had one strict rule: the box must never, ever be opened. Of course, curiosity is a dangerous thing. The moment the box was pried open, the nightmare began. The new owner reported a smell of jasmine and dried flowers, followed by the stench of cat urine and rotting eggs. But it wasn't just the smell, it was the effect on reality. Every owner of the box reported the same string of tragedies. Terrifying nightmares of a haggard old woman, sudden strokes, strange skin rashes, and a pervasive sense of doom that followed them even when they were miles away from the object. One owner even reported that all the light bulbs in his house shattered simultaneously while he was in the same room as the box. When you look at the box, it seems harmless. It's made of wood, carved with two doors. But inside, archaeologists and researchers found a collection of bizarre items. Two 1920s pennies, a lock of blonde hair bound with cord, a lock of black hair, and a small golden wine goblet. These aren't just random trinkets. In the occult world, these are tethers, objects used in a ritual to bind a consciousness to a physical vessel. Why is it too dangerous to move? Today, the Dybbuk box is owned by Zach Bagans and kept in his haunted museum in Las Vegas. It is stored inside a specially consecrated glass chamber, surrounded by salt and protective symbols. But even then, it isn't safe. When world-famous musician Post Malone touched the glass casing of the box in 2018, his life spiraled into a series of bizarre accidents. An emergency plane landing, a drive-by shooting, and a high-speed car crash, all within a single month. Scientific skeptics call it the nocebo effect, the power of suggestion causing physical symptoms. But the sheer volume of consistent reports makes even the most hardened researchers hesitate. There is a psychological gravity to the box. It seems to feed on fear, and the more it is moved, the more active it becomes. The box is a relic of the darkest chapter of human history, the Holocaust. It is said the spirit inside was summoned during a seance in a concentration camp by people who had lost everything and wanted to trap the evil they were witnessing. To move the box, to open it, or even to focus too much energy on it, is believed to weaken the seal. It remains behind glass, under 24-hour surveillance, not to protect it from thieves, but to protect the world from it. It is a reminder that some doors are locked for a reason, and some containers hold things that were never meant to breathe our air. As the museum lights go down, the Dybbuk box sits in total silence, a small wooden cage for a nightmare that is always looking for a way out. Our final relic isn't a crown, a sword, or a book. It is a person. In 1991, two German tourists hiking in the Ötztal Alps stumbled upon what they thought was a modern murder victim. But they were wrong by about 5,000 years. This was Ötzi, a Copper Age man preserved so perfectly in the ice that his skin, his tattoos, and even the last meal in his stomach were still intact. He is the ultimate archaeological treasure. But for many, he is also the world's most dangerous passenger. Almost immediately after Ötzi was removed from his icy grave, a dark pattern began to emerge. It's what local researchers call the curse of the Iceman. To date, 7 people associated with his discovery or study have died, many under sudden or bizarre circumstances. It started with Helmut Simon, the man who first found Ötzi. Years later, he returned to the same mountains, only to be caught in a freak blizzard and fall to his death in a ravine. The head of the mountain rescue team sent to find him, he died of a heart attack just an hour after Simon's funeral. Then there was Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who first touched Ötzi with his bare hands. He died in a violent car crash while on his way to give a lecture about the mummy. One by one, the list grew. A mountain guide killed in an avalanche, a molecular biologist found dead of a rare blood disease. Is it a coincidence? Or did we disturb something that was meant to be frozen forever? Today, Ötzi is kept at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Italy. But he isn't just lying on a shelf. He is stored in a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar cold chamber. The temperature is fixed at exactly -6 degrees Celsius, and the humidity is kept at 98%. Why? Because the moment he is moved or the temperature fluctuates, he begins to degrade. But more than that, there is a logistical fear. Moving Ötzi requires a level of biological containment usually reserved for the world's deadliest viruses. Scientists have found over 19 different types of modern bacteria on his skin, but also ancient pathogens that the modern human immune system hasn't encountered in 5,000 years. To move him is to risk a biological bridge between the ancient past and the present. But the most chilling part of Ötzi isn't his curse, it's his story. X-rays revealed an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder and defensive wounds on his hands. He was murdered. He was running for his life when the ice finally claimed him. When we look at Ötzi, we are looking at a frozen moment of ancient violence. Archaeologists treat him with a reverence that borders on fear. He is rarely ever touched by human hands now. He remains behind a small, triple-paned glass window. You can look at him, but you can never reach him. He is a relic that is too dangerous to move, because he is a silent witness to a crime that time forgot. And perhaps, as the local legends suggest, the Iceman doesn't want to be a museum exhibit. He wants to return to the silence of the peaks. From ancient hexes to modern scientific nightmares, these 24 objects remind us that some doors are better left locked. Which of these relics chilled you to the bone? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's darkest mysteries. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.